All right, good afternoon. How's everybody doing? It's outstanding. Hooray, fabulous. Cool, thank you, of course, for coming to FXD this year, and thank you for sticking around and attending this talk. What I want to do today in this talk is to talk about motivation and motivation's role in financial well-being, in achieving financial goals, as well as thinking about well-being in and of itself and how financial well-being relates to overarching well-being and how those two models work together, and tell you a little bit too about what we do. So after that lovely introduction, my team, I head the behavior change design team at MadPow. We've seen some themes here in some of the earlier talks that just happened, where we too are looking at this balance of motivation and behavioral science and human-centered design so that we can both understand behaviors in context, come from an evidence-based background, and implement person-centered solutions as well, right? We find, much like Isaac talked about, this blend is really conducive to addressing customer needs and human needs at the same time. We also consider the role of data analysis so that we can understand our customers from a person-to-person basis, so we can know what works for whom, when, where, and how, and in what contexts. And so that when we design through a full scale, we can not only know who we're working for, what the barriers to change are, but also to test and to implement, test, and scale, much like Dan just spoke about with the work that they do at Betterment as well. And when we think about interventions, when we think about what we design for not only the screen, but beyond the screen. Our goal is to design for real-world behaviors, right? Using technology, using digital to get people to change their lives in the real world. Our output are interventions, which we consider to be coordinated set of strategies intended to change specific patterns of behavior through directly targeting those underlying determinants, right? What are the causes of behaviors and what are the barriers that get in the way? And these pieces to the puzzle are the key, we believe, to unlocking behavior change and setting our interventions up in a way that maximize the likelihood of uptake, of engagement, and of effectiveness so that we can reach the outcomes of quality of life, economic, health outcomes for the individuals in the populations for who we design for. And that allows us, that process allows us and a methodology to move from intuitive, using our guts for design, to empirical, to including strategy and evidence, to precision, right? To really know what's working for whom in what contexts and why. And that's important when we think about financial well-being. For all of us, our goal is to increase the well-being and the financial well-being of the people that we serve with the technologies and the services that we're designing for them. We want to help people live their versions of the good life. To do this, we need to understand what financial well-being is. We need to have a definition, and we need to know what constructs make up financial well-being. If you look into it, there's not a lot of agreement on the definition of financial well-being. There are many, some are better than others. One that we particularly like and we particularly use is one that was developed by a client of ours, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Their definition for financial well-being is a state wherein a person can fully meet current and ongoing financial obligations, can feel secure in their financial future, and is able to make choices that allow them to enjoy life. How does that sound? Does that sound pretty good? Yeah, it's a bit subjective, right? We're talking about states of being. We're talking about subjective experiences, feelings. They go on to get a little more detailed to say control over day-to-day and month-to-month finances, a capacity to absorb a financial shock, staying on track to meet records, and the financial freedom, again, to meet and make choices that allow one to live their version of the good life, right? An individual version of good life. Still pretty subjective. We need to add outcome measures and things that are more objective to these kinds of models if indeed we're going to track and trace and design interventions so that we can create things that motivate, engage, and sustain those behaviors over time. So we can look at things like income. We can look at things like expenses over time, total amount of money reserved, total burden of debt, mortgage, credit card loans, ability to pay bills, objective measures that we can know for each and every individual if those targets are being made. And we can look at particular behaviors. The focus of what we want to change is on behaviors, and the way we get to those behaviors is through underlying determinants. There's not a lot of research or a comprehensive source on the determinants of financial well-being. So we put one together. It may be a little bit hard to read. We're going to focus on motivation and individual, but it's important. It is very important to note that beyond individual capacities, individual behaviors, motivations, capabilities, we need to think about the larger context and environment as well. The social circle that people are embedded in, right? The behaviors that their parents had when they grew up, if they have alimony, the behaviors of their spouses. We live in social circles and social networks. What people do around us affect our behaviors, as well as the environment in which we live and work. If there is access to work, if there is access to jobs, if there is not, there's not much else we can do at the individual level. In the panel next, we're going to talk about designing for underserved populations. All of us need to think a bit about those environmental circumstances which also affect the roles, the jobs, the materials that people work within at an individual level. So that said, we're going to focus on motivation. Motivation in financial well-being is a construct that's often not talked about. It's not talked about as much as it would be in, say, health behavior change. We talk a lot about biases and heuristics and defaults in good behavioral economics principles, but we don't typically get into motivation. We study finance and its effect on motivation, but we often do not study motivation's effect on finance. And it matters. It's important. Changing financial behaviors is almost never just about the financial behavior in and of itself. When we're asking people to change their behaviors, to save for the future, to change their spending habits, there are compromises and trade-offs that we need to consider at the day-to-day level. People need to engage in new emotion regulation strategies, right? When we think of retail therapy and the underlying constructs that are driving those purchasing behaviors, we're not getting to the root without thinking of motivation. We need to help people develop new skills and have the motivation to start and maintain those skills over time. And we need to think about shuffling of social relationships and dynamics. What does it mean to me to not be able to go out to dinner with my friends and my family if I'm trying to save for X or if I'm trying to get out of debt? I need to make changes to my life that affect us at a very real and visceral level. So when we think about motivation, and we think about motivation and behavior change, we don't want to focus on just forming new financial habits, but really giving people good reasons to fuel and sustain their change. We want to focus on the reason, the why, the motive. This is what fuels and sustains change. When we think about motivation, we can think about it in terms of importance times confidence. That gives us the fuel. This behavior, this goal is important to me. I value it. And I have the confidence that I can execute these behaviors and that the outcomes that I achieve are achievable and beneficial to me. These are the strategies, these are the content, these are the techniques that we want to put into the work, the services, the digital products for designing for behavior change in financial services. We want to give people both the why and the how, right? The why to build that importance, to create energy, to create volitional behavior, and the how to build the sense of competence so that people know what to do, they know how to do it, and they feel a sense of competence. It goes a little bit off of when we think about defaults and defaulting people into behaviors, as Dan mentioned, right? We do have good uptake and we do have good effects when you choose default patterns to get people into beneficial and welfare behaviors. But when we think about doing behaviors repeated over time, changing your spending habits, changing your saving habits, things that we do day in, day out that are influenced by the environment that we live in, developing a strong why leads to better outcomes. It leads to trying new behaviors. It leads to persistence. And most often it leads to more success. Compared to the caveats of nudges and defaults are really, that's a second order change, right? We're changing the environment and not changing the person. We believe in changing the person at its core in addition to the environment as well. That way, when people internalize the value, when they build the skills, they can stand up to any of the different barriers and defaults that may come their way, right? We've given them the tools, we've given them the fuel, and we've given them the capacity to make those changes and sustain those changes over time. And this is motivation. Motivation is that fuel for behavior. It is also directly linked to well-being in general, to satisfaction in life, to living our version of the good life when we pursue the activities and the actions that we want to pursue that have meaning to us. When we think about motivation, we can think about it as human energy, as psychological energy directed at a particular goal. Both energy and goals are important when we think about how to design and facilitate behavior change, initiation, and sustained behavior over time. Early concepts of motivation thought just about amount, right? You either had it or you don't. And we would love people to have more motivation for the things we would like them to do, the things that are objectively beneficial for them. But motivation is more complex than this. Quality of motivation matters, right? We need to talk and think about quality, the different reasons people may have for the same behaviors in a group or a population. When people have no motivation, why is that? Something for all of us to consider when we just can't get people motivated and started. There's usually 3 reasons for which we can think about that we can design to. We can create strategies to combat these reasons. The behavior is either not important, like saving for retirement's not valued, or other things are more important at the moment. People don't feel that they have the ability to carry out that behavior. They may not know how to create a retirement fund, or they don't believe that trying is going to produce the desired outcome or enough future savings. I'm going to keep getting attacked by this. We can design to increase someone's value, the sense of importance in those behaviors that are beneficial, to get them to start taking small steps towards change. We can make those changes really easy, make them feel confident over time so that they feel they have the ability, and we can show them their outcomes in small steps so that they can see that the returns now will also compound and lead into the future. When we have motivation, it's much more complex than just having motivation or thinking about it in terms of quantity, right? There are those different reasons we talked about, and those reasons predominate and lead to the outcomes that we're looking to change, both from a persistence point of view and from a well-being point of view. And we can look at these different reasons and these different motives as a continuum. From the far side of external motivation, right, which is when we are moved to behave as a result of direct rewards or punishments or demands for doing a behavior, right? When things from the outside get us to behave in certain ways, right? It is outside our sense of self, and we're feeling pressured and coerced into behaviors. A little bit closer is introjected motivation. This is when we have internal pressures to behave, whether we're doing things in order to preserve our self-worth or to reduce anxiety or guilt for doing certain things. We get a little bit closer and we think about identified motivation. When we have a value for a particular behavior, when we value those behaviors because it improves our financial security, we're more likely to start and we're more likely to persist in doing those behaviors over the long term. A little bit closer when we start to get to our sense of self, when our behaviors support the other behaviors within our lives. I'm saving now because it is important to me in the future to take care of my kids and send them to school. It's important for me in the future to make sure that I have enough money to cover healthcare costs. It is part of my other life. There is an instrumental reason for me to save and to change particular behaviors, right? It is that outcome goal that we're focused on, and it comes from within. And at the final step, it's when we enjoy or we have an interest in particular behaviors where it becomes very easy for folks to do. The ones on the right side, the green ones, are much more likely to start and to persist. On the left side, it becomes harder and we get short-term gains and quick drop-offs. So we can think about how we can utilize questionnaires, onboarding, techniques to get people into these different segments so that we can serve them the right kind of content, the right kind of features, the right kind of functions within the products and services that we design. So really quickly, one more time. External, we can think about the feelings that people have. I have to pay for a fee for overdrafting my account. I don't accrue any transaction fees if I have X amount in my savings, or I got the Thrifty Thinker badge in my app, right? We can see how these would motivate one-time behaviors or quick short-term behaviors, but probably are not strong enough to persist very complex behaviors or long-term behaviors. When we think about those pressures to maintain our self-worth or reduce anxiety, I need to buy expensive things so that others will like me, or I feel like a failure for not making as much money as my friends. These kinds of pressures have negative effects and negative consequences on our long-term behaviors, right? We can spark some initial motivation, but the rate of return and the rate of decline is much more rapid than when we identify those values, right? Being frugal is part of who I am. I want to be prepared, and saving now is a way to do that. When we can move people from one side of this continuum to the other, we start to get continued success and continued momentum in the right direction. Having cash is a means to help me do more of the things I like to do. Can we connect financial behaviors, financial goals, to the things that people find important, to the things they want to do, to their intrinsic motives and their vision of the good life? Not just money for the sake of wealth accumulation, but what does it afford me to do that I am passionate about, that I enjoy, and that I love, right? Or for the people that just like playing the stocks, it's really easy, right? These folks you don't need to worry about. They're in your system. They're doing what they do, and they're fine, right? So when we look at this and when we think about how we can consider motivation across retirement platforms, we can look at the problem, right? 10,000 people retire every day. We're in a crisis trying to get people to save. How do we motivate those folks, and how do we sustain it? Very often in the products that we look at, we do two things, right? We come right in and we say, okay, so when are you going to retire, and how long are you going to be in retirement, right? This is the typical model. But what are we asking here? We're asking questions that we don't know the answers to, and we have an adverse reaction to it. What do you mean, how many years do I have left? How long am I going to live after that? These are hard questions to answer, right? At that moment, we're creating control, we're creating pressure, we're creating external demands for thinking through our retirement, right? Rather than connecting to things that are important and valuable and enjoyed by us. So we can think about that more, right? 16 ways to not outlive your money. Really common phrase, right? Outliving your money in retirement. Who wants to think about that? In fact, nobody wants to think about that. When you do a survey, people would rather die than think about outliving their funds in retirement, right? So we can do better than this, right? We can link those retirement plans or those goals into things that people care about, people are comfortable with, and things that they value and are important. And by the way, if you want a t-shirt for Don't Outlive Your Money, this actually exists. I have no idea why. So the other thing real quickly to end with is when we think about energizing change, so not only thinking about external or controlled motives and how to move people from those motives, right? Changing the language that we use and focusing them more on more internal valued things. We can also think about this concept of needs. We talked about wants and what people want, but we also need to consider needs. From motivational science, from self-determination theory, there is a concept of basic psychological needs. What these needs are universal human needs that we all have, regardless of race, of location, of age, of culture. Those needs are three. They are the need to feel competent, to feel mastery over our environment, improvement and growth. The need for autonomy, which is to feel like we are in control of our behaviors, volitional behavior, which is what we're going for. And the need for relatedness, which is a reciprocal need to both connect and feel connected to others in a meaningful way in our social circle. When we fulfill these needs, when we feel that these needs are being met, we engage in behaviors, we persist in behaviors, and we continue those behaviors over the long term. We can think about what that means for design of our products and services. It is our job, I would argue, to design what we call need-satisfying experiences. How can the products, the services, the technologies that we offer create interactions with individuals to satisfy those needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness? A few principles, and then we'll be off to the next panel. But if we think about designing for autonomy, we can think about empathy, which we've heard a lot about today, right? Understanding others' internal frame of reference and the goals, the needs, the values that they consider important and are important to them. Offering meaningful choice. Enough choices for people to make decisions that are indeed aligned with their goals, aligned with their values and their interests, providing options whenever possible. We can think about relevance. When options can't be made, providing a rationale that explains why there is a lack of options, right? It's a polite thing to do when we ask someone to do something in the real world. It's a polite thing to do to provide that rationale. It allows people to buy in, to get on the same side, and again, respect their need for autonomy. And also changing the language that we use when we have demands. Using less shoulds, musts, have-tos, and more mights, oughts, coulds, and showing the benefit of the outcomes and of the requests that we're asking of people. Whoops, wrong way. When we think about competence, making sure we have expectations of what it's going to take. There's nothing worse than having the motivation to enroll in a new service and finding out it's a 45-minute enrollment form with all kinds of papers and information that we don't have. Set those expectations up front so that we don't lose momentum and lose people in that process so that they know what to expect and what kinds of outcomes they get for the efforts they put in. We can think about real-world challenges, making sure that the goals that we set for people or help people set are not too difficult to achieve and yet not too easy where it's boring. This middle ground creates engagement and engagement with behaviors that we'd like people to engage with. So not too hard so you drop out and not too easy so you get bored and drop out as well, right? Frustration versus boredom. We can think about building skills. Again, we talked about this. Behavior change is a skills-building process, and providing meaningful feedback on growth, on progress over time, so that we can redirect, feel competent, and make those changes to shift as we need it. Finally, connection. How can we create connection with other people through the products and services that we create. This is going to be a great video. One for the websites. Collaboration. How can we allow people to collaborate with others that are meaningful for them? How can we feel like our services are collaborative to help them, again, capitalize on the goals that they want? Personalized, tailoring, using machine learning, personalization to make it individual fit for each and every individual. And again, much like empathy, using compassion and tone, particularly when we're working with people of underserved populations. We'd love it if you would all think about how you might mix and use some of these techniques within the products and services that you're designing. There is a wealth of opportunity here for tapping into motivation in a person-supporting way to really make a difference in the products and services that we design. Thank you.